the people I see as representative of high quality left thinking are typically categorized as on the right in order to dismiss them, which leaves the left nominally under the control of people advocating things that very frequently, when I hear these formulations, I feel like it would take adults 10 minutes of discussion to figure out why these things don't work, can't be tried, and to just put the ideas to bed. But instead, we're going to take apart civilization in order to run an experiment, the outcome of which is absolutely certain. So something about the veto power, which is obviously in part the result of an empowerment that comes from social media. I have mentioned to others that I think we are suffering the consequences of the loss of the role of leadership, that leadership has been demoted to the status of influencer, and that the problem is influencer is a producer-consumer modality. And the consumer is at the point that a leader might tell you something that you don't want to hear, but you need to know. An influencer may say it, and people will switch to some influencer that's less likely to cause them angst. And that loss of leaders is resulting in, just the most foolish beliefs rising as if they are new, as if they have meaningful content, as if they can even be spelled out in some sort of consistent form that would allow you to evaluate them, when really, in each case, they run through your fingers like water.
I think the crisis of leadership is actually key to a lot of this, because the thing that is very striking is, a lot of the kind of the woke mob, or these gangs of social media vigilantes who go after anyone who says something disagreeable. They are quite scary in the sense that they are obviously unhinged. I mean, there's a real problem here. I mean, they're often quite hateful individuals. I get the most obscene emails from people like this, threatening things and saying things which are really objectionable. And they behave in a very, very bad way. If you look at J.K. Rowling, for example, who's getting a lot of abuse at the moment because she believes in biological sex, which is blasphemy in the woke era. They do things, they send her pornographic pictures. Or if she posts a tweet about a children's book and lots of children respond to her, these people will post pornographic pictures in those discussion threads. This is not normal behavior. This is unhinged, regressive, incredibly anti-human, antisocial behavior. So they are sometimes quite scary. But the other striking thing about them is that they're often very small in number. So when I've encountered controversies at British universities where there have been groups of people protesting against a visit of mine, for example, they're always fairly small in number. They're always quite socially awkward, strange young people. We're not talking about vast numbers of well-adjusted human beings. So the question I always ask myself is, how is it possible that these mobs of strange people have such a big influence? And I think you've actually nailed it. It's the interplay between the vociferous nature of these people and their censorious desires. It's the interplay of that with the crisis of leadership and with the crisis of institutions. And I think one of the main players in the current climate is institutional cowardice. The way in which institutions just roll over as soon as 7 people write them an email saying, take down this monument, or rename your halls of residence, or take down that bust of someone who died 200 years ago. There are so many institutions who just nod along and do as they are told. Or big companies, all it takes is for a handful of people on Twitter to tell Netflix or some other big company that they are advertising on a controversial website, or they're advertising on a right-wing magazine, for those corporations to withdraw their adverts. there's so little backbone that, no one's willing to stand up. And of course, all of this just gives a green light to the mob. It feeds their desires. It feeds their sense of power. And so I think there's a really close connection between those two things. And I think the failure of politicians to take a stand against this stuff is also very striking. When Trump gave his Mount Rushmore speech recently on the 4th of July, and he talked about cancel culture, it was actually a really good speech. I have no idea who wrote it. I'm pretty sure Trump didn't write it, but it was a really good speech, not very well delivered. But it was a really good speech, and it was so striking that this was the first time a major politician had said things like this, where he said they want to cancel the American Revolution. They want to cancel the ideas of Western civilization, and that's absolutely correct. And so if more people did what Trump did at Mount Rushmore, I think we'd probably be in a better position. So that's a really key point. And I think what's becoming more and more clear over time is that this is an assault on Western civilization. And if you look at the mania of the past few weeks in relation to Black Lives Matter and tearing down statues and everything else, on the surface, it looks like an attack on Confederate statues or statues of slave owners. And, not many people are going to lose sleep over a statue of a slave owner being torn down in Bristol in England. Fine, who cares? But it's not just about that. This is part of a broader campaign which depicts modern Western history as one crime after another. The way in which America is currently talked about as this disgusting, sinful, racist country. Racism is the original sin of the American Republic, which it will never wash clean. And, and this conscious effort on the part of New York Times type people to change the founding date of America from 1776 to 1619 is so interesting, because that's really an effort by sections of the liberal elite or the illiberal elite to rewrite history itself, to refashion America as a country that was founded in sin, founded in crime, rather than one that was founded in revolution and the search for freedom and the First Amendment and all those other wonderful things. The same thing is happening in the UK. The way that left-wing activists and often school teachers and university educators, the way they talk about Britain, you'd think it was the most evil country that ever existed. All we hear about is the slave trade and empire and colonialism and all these things which had many, many, many terrible consequences around the world. No one's doubting that. We don't hear about the English Revolution. We don't hear about the Chartist movement for democracy. We don't hear about the struggle in the 1600s for press freedom, which influenced the founding of America to a large degree. We don't hear about the Magna Carta. We don't hear about England as the birthplace of liberty in many ways. So there's a conscious effort on the part of this emerging elite to reimagine Western history as just a litany of crimes. And I think that's something that is absolutely essential to stand up to.
Yeah, I resonate with all of this. The cowardice is breathtaking. And, it's rooted in a very simple game theoretic comparison between my ability to get through today in the face of a mob that's threatening me and our ability to get through next week. And so what's happening is that corporations, individuals, colleges are all making the same calculation, which is they're solving their today problem at the expense of a much larger tomorrow problem. And it is, you're 100% right about the attack on Western civilization. And the funny thing is, I remember the moment at which I became aware of this. During the Evergreen meltdown, I detected that this was what was going on. And I said out loud, I believe it was in a faculty meeting, that not only was this an attack on the institution, but this was really an attack on not only the Enlightenment, but the concept of enlightenment. And what came back was not the denial that I expected. It was an embrace of what I had just said. And the idea was, right, enlightenment is a white people thing. It's bad. It is, the root of slavery and all other, sins, and therefore we are right to tear it down. And I just thought, my God, what are we playing with here? We're really at root dealing with whether we will have any agreement that would allow us to establish even a single claim on some basis other than power, right? We saw on Twitter very recently a battle over whether 2 + 2 actually equals 4. And of course, that has a history in literature. But the fact that people were actually earnestly arguing this tells us where we are. And it has caused me to think the following thought. I don't think almost anybody is this dumb, right? I don't think, as you point out, these are tiny movements, but it's not even this tiny number of people who believes these things. I think almost nobody believes these things, and that in effect, they are like a uniform, and they are simply declaring, I am with those people. And the fact is, what's frightening is I am with those people. Those people may well have the power to uninvent the West. And if they do, we will be left with tyranny, and then maybe we will reinvent the West later if we survive to do it. But the question is really one of net effect. There are obviously major structural problems in the West. There is a problem with inequity, if we use the standard definition of that term rather than the modern fashion. But did the West accomplish vastly more than it has failed to accomplish? It did. And so uninventing it over that which it has not attained is lunacy. And yet, somehow, I have to tell you, all the people with enough wealth to pick up and move seem to be fleeing cities because somehow, even though there is no evidence whatsoever that the populace wants the police defunded, we are now watching the defunding of police because we think some mob is demanding it, when in fact we don't even know, the mob, because it doesn't have leaders. We can't say what fraction of the people who are attacking federal buildings actually advocate the abolition of the police, what fraction of them want police budgets reduced, what fraction of them is simply out to make mayhem. But in any case, it isn't civilization demanding this. It is the tiniest fraction that is now apparently in a position to dictate terms to the rest of us.
Yeah, I think we are living through a bourgeois reaction against the Enlightenment, and it's terrifying, actually. And you see it all the time now. The very idea of reason is called into question so often these days. The existence of free will, the desirability of freedom of speech, a belief in the autonomy of human beings, or the potential autonomy of human beings. All these ideas that drove, well, first the Renaissance and then the Enlightenment, are explicitly called into question now, particularly on campuses, but in the political sphere more broadly. And what we're living through is a reaction against the Enlightenment. It's a counter-enlightenment movement made up of various different groups of people. There's the noisy brigade, the kind of woke mob who are the most explicit in their regressive, backward views. There are the institutions which are increasingly incapable of standing up for the values that they were founded to stand up for. So you have museums in the UK, for example, and museums around the West, in fact, which are now beating themselves up constantly about what they can put on display, whether they should send certain artifacts back to Africa or back to Greece or back to wherever they might have come from. No sense that they might have, an intellectual responsibility to uphold the value of the Enlightenment, the idea that you could study things, that you could collect things, that you could improve man's understanding of himself through founding these kinds of institutions for the public good. Even at that level, the values of the Enlightenment moment are just being trashed all the time, often by the people who are supposed to be upholding them. One of the things I find most grotesque in all of this is something you've mentioned there about the way in which the Enlightenment is seen as a white people thing. That's for white people, that's for Europeans. Let's talk about what black people need or what minority groups need. And apparently they need a form of politics that is less based in reason, less based in science. I mean, we've seen some stuff over the past few days and weeks in which ideas like timekeeping are described as a white trait, or a belief in the exercise of reason over passion is seen as a white trait. This is explicitly racist. I mean, I always was concerned that woke politics would rehabilitate racial thinking through the identitarian ideology, but it's actually just rehabilitating racism. Because if you think white people are good at keeping to time and understanding the world in a scientific, reasoned way, but black people are not, you are a racist. I have news for you. You're a racist person.